So Juicehead, a fantastic YouTuber, does great stuff, covers a lot of RPGs, like from CDPR, from BGS, all that stuff. You probably know him, I'm sure. He posted this tweet, which got my gears a-turning and thinking. He said, in response to the GTA 6 delay, lots were hopeful for an 11/11/26 release date, kind of echoing what they did with Skyrim, which was, I believe, 11/11/11, or was it 11/10/11? It was something like that. They like to do that. They did it with Fallout 4 as well. But now he says, I wonder if this delay would impact that or not. Elder Scrolls 6 is more likely 2027, in my opinion, but interesting to ponder. In my humble opinion, there is no shot that Elder Scrolls 6 launches next year. I just don't see it as even a remote possibility, okay? And in this segment, I'm going to explain why, using clips, snippets, interviews, and various statements and things to demonstrate the point. I think the only way that you can interpret Elder Scrolls 6 as coming in 2026 is if you're only looking at one slide from the FTC hearings that leaked during that time period. But you also have to remember the FTC hearings are kind of a weird thing because there were some slides that were revealed during the FTC hearings that were from like 2020, 2021, but they were only gained and found in 2023, for example. But then there's later statements that are made in 2023 where they say other things. So you just have to bear this in mind when we're looking at all this, is that timelines are important, okay? But I want to just be clear that I think anybody thinking that Elder Scrolls 6 was coming out next year, I think that's very wishful thinking. I think there's personally no shot, especially when you look at one particular comment, which I'll show you, that Phil Spencer, the man writing the checks, made recently, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But I think that this is what most people are looking at when they're pointing to the 2026 release window. They look at this post, or this time period from September of 2023, okay? Okay, that's where we're playing. New documents point to Xbox exclusivity and release date of 2026, okay? What this is specifically is they point to a slide. This slide has a bunch of information on it, but if I zoom in, enhance. So you can see this outlines Microsoft's approach following acquisitions since 2018. They outline the developer and the game. You have games like Deathloop, Ghostwire Tokyo, Fallout 76, Elder Scrolls Online, Starfield, Redfall, and Elder Scrolls 6 listed here. Deathloop, release date September 14th, 2021. Ghostwire Tokyo, March 25th of 2022. Fallout 76, 10/23/2018. Elder Scrolls Online, 2014. Starfield, they put in here H1 2023. Xbox PC, Redfall here, H1 2023. One of the things, this is what they say, quote, one of the things that has me most excited is seeing the roadmap with Bethesda's future games, some announced and many unannounced, to Xbox console and PC, including Starfield, the highly anticipated new space epic currently in development by Bethesda Game Studios. It would end up getting pushed a little bit further back from that, but still rough window. And then Elder Scrolls 6, you can see here, it's got the check mark where it's an existing IP, not a multiplayer game, not a cross-platform cross-play game, and released on PlayStation, they mark it no. Not yet, at least. Platforms available, they also outline that as just Xbox PC. And this is one thing where you just, again, have to remember is that things can change, okay? So what they said with Elder Scrolls 6 at this time was TBC, but expected 2026 or later, 2026 or later. And then they say, in order to be on Xbox, I want us to be able to bring the full complete package of what we have. And that would be true when I think about Elder Scrolls 6, which to me just sounds like saying we want the game to release on Xbox. So it doesn't sound like they're locking it down to exclusivity or anything. But this is literally, I think, the extent of where people are getting the 2026 timeframe. I think that really is the extent of it, which is not a lot. There were other things that This is also funny. The document lines up pretty well with what we already know, that the Elder Scrolls 6 is still a ways off. This was really funny. The 2026 release date was brought up back in June when a Microsoft lawyer fumbled and said that this is funny, Elder Scrolls 16 is coming in 2026, accelerating Bethesda's release calendar by 124 years. Yeah, it's a little funny. It's why it's always so funny when I hear people that like don't know anything about gaming discuss gaming. Yeah, Elder Scrolls 16. I can't wait for that one. But they said, as you can see here, there are two Elder Scrolls games. One is online, called Elder Scrolls Online. That is a multiplayer game. It is on PlayStation today. The FTC's lawyer is talking about Elder Scrolls 16 that is projected for release in 2026 as a single player game. And so this is what the lawyer was informed, clearly talking about Elder Scrolls 6. And he's saying, or she's saying, 2026 is when it's releasing during the FTC hearings. That again is something that was said years ago, maybe got the release window wrong, also got the name wrong, but that's what people are usually going with when they say that the game is going to release in 2026. Okay, that's what they're pointing to. Now, there's a couple of other things. For example, in August of that same year in 2023, they revealed that Elder Scrolls 6 was leaving production. So what was specifically said was, quote, "We have all of our studios focused on making Starfield the best it can be," Pete Hines said before he retired. And yes, there are people working on Elder Scrolls 6, but this is what the studio is focused on, meaning Starfield. So no, at no point early are you going to hear about the Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield is our focus now, and it's going to be or remain our priority for a while before we talk about anything else. And he went on to say that Elder Scrolls 6 is no longer in pre-production, as Todd Howard described it last year. He said it's in development, but it's in early development. And this was, again, August of 2023, right before or at the launch of Starfield. Okay. Now there's other things we could point to where, you know, in June of 2021, Todd was still describing it as being this in the design phase. 3 years after the Elder Scrolls 6 was announced, Todd is thinking about making it, which I appreciate the snark. But yes, they revealed the game in 2018, and 3 years later, they were still in the design phase. He said, "I have to be careful what I say. It's a very long way off," Todd said. This was back in 2016, as you can see here, before it was formally announced at E3 2018. Todd confirmed that Bethesda was working on a new Elder Scrolls game, because of course it was, but warned that it was extremely long ways off. So far, in fact, that he implied the technology required to make it happen, didn't actually exist. He said at the time, quote, "I want to be careful what I say. It's a very long way off. I could sit here and explain the game to you, and you would say, that sounds like you don't even have the technology. How long is that going to take?" And so it's something that's going to take a lot of time. What we have in mind for that game, 5 years down the road, and 3 years after the announcement, it appears the situation may not have changed as much as you would have expected or hoped. In a new interview with The Telegraph, Todd said that Bethesda is still working on the technology. What he said specifically, I found an archived version of that article. What he said was, "It's a good time." Again, this is from June 29th of 2021. "It's good to think of the Elder Scrolls 6 as still being in the design phase, but we're checking the tech. Is this going to handle the things we want to do in that game? Every game will have some new suites of technology, so Elder Scrolls 6 will have some additions on to the Creation Engine 2 that game is going to require." Which again just reiterates something else that he described, which is that Elder Scrolls 6 is going to use the Creation Engine 2. They're not going to do like a big rebrand as Creation Engine 3. It's going to be built with the same tools used in Starfield. Okay, which is why it's like kind of funny that people are like, "Yeah, I think they'll get rid of load screens." I'm like, sure about that? Sure about that? Because it's the same tools, the same thing. But all of this comes down to something that happened also during the FTC hearings. Okay, so we just looked at the little snippet where one of the lawyers for Microsoft described Elder Scrolls 16 as coming out in 2026, which seems to just be sloppy language. Got the name wrong. I think he's looking at the 2026 and beyond timeline and using that, pointing to that year and saying that's when it's coming out, but it seems sloppy. Somebody who's probably not too sloppy when it comes to release window, and somebody who I don't think is going to accidentally mix up Elder Scrolls 6 with Elder Scrolls 16, is Phil Spencer. And he went to court as part of these FTC hearings and described a lot of interesting details. So this was posted June of 2023. Okay. And as you can see here, this is where it breaks down. Now in court, Spencer spoke about The Elder Scrolls 6's release window and planned platforms. This was during the period when everything was about exclusivity with Xbox. The Activision acquisition was being discussed, and they were wondering if they were going to make a bunch of games exclusive. So that's kind of where that's the lens through which this was written and being discussed at the time. Now exclusivity has been largely disregarded from Xbox, but that's that's why most of the questions are around that. He goes on, quote, "It's many years away," discussing Elder Scrolls' release window, "but it's a game we have announced we would begin working on. I think we've been a little unclear on what platforms it will launch on, given how far out the game is. It's difficult for us right now to nail down exactly what platforms that game will launch on. As I said with Elder Scrolls 6, it's so far out, it's hard to understand what the platforms will even be at this point. It's the same team that's finishing Starfield, which comes out this September. So we're talking about it being likely 5+ years away." That firmly puts it out of 2026. Like, if he's saying it's likely 5+ years away, that would mean it doesn't launch until 2028 at the earliest. He's describing how they don't even know what the platforms will look at. He's saying, you're asking me if it's going to launch on PS5? We don't even know what the PS6 will look like, and that's the console it would probably be coming out on. We don't even know what our consoles are going to look like at that time. And that's the time period he's talking about. Not to mention that he's saying 5+ years from now. And this also passes, I think, kind of the gut check just in general. We've seen the output of Bethesda. They broke Fallout 4 with the next-gen update, and it took them 1.5 years to issue a fix, which comes out in 3 days. And we don't even know if that will actually fix any of the stuff they claim it will fix. We've seen them do in the 2+ years that Starfield has been out. Time flies when you're having fun on moons. They've put out one expansion, which was so poorly received that even hardcore Bethesda fans were like, really, guys? Really? It was all of like 5 hours long and quite mediocre. And now they've spent over 1 year on the second expansion, and they still haven't even announced it yet. It's still completely locked down, and they have nothing to share for it. It really seems like their production output, their efficiency is non-existent. So hearing that they're thinking 5+ years kind of makes sense to me, because it really feels like their efficiency is quite laughable and significantly worse than it was just a handful of years ago, which is something we've discussed at length. But probably the most interesting breakdown of that inefficiency actually comes from their own employees. And again, I've referenced it a number of times, but there's a really fascinating
came to me and said, I think we have
really fascinating GDC talk with Will Shen and Daryl Brigner, and they discussed developing and making games with Bethesda, and some of the stuff that they describe is just insane.
Well over 500 people, but also we are now working with a large number of external groups, well over a dozen, and these groups are doing everything from effects, lighting, they're working on tools programming, systems programming, pretty much everything. And they have to all be integrated into the development team for the work they are doing. And another part of this is these are external groups, each with their own culture, each with their...
Did Starfield feel like it was made with like 3 times the developers as Fallout 4? Did it feel like that? Because I don't think it felt like that. I don't think it felt like that. It really didn't. But you can see, just like as they've gained employees and developers helping them on these projects, their output has actually dropped, dude. Like, they're doing less with so much more. It did, but in a bad way. I think in the purest way of like, in the purest way, it was just too many cooks in the kitchen. But like, listen to this.
Of favoring the department over the actual project and what the project needed. And this makes a lot of sense because when you are first asked to be a department lead, you're worried about the department. That is the thing you're told you're responsible for. Suddenly you have to reconcile several people's schedules. You're responsible for them. You're responsible for their time and their output. And when your schedule is getting squeezed, you want to defend it and make sure your team has the time they need and is hitting things at the quality that it needs. But this can also lead to a siloing effect where every department is scrambling for their resources and saying no to collaboration requests. So before we had the problem of, hey, when we're doing these big collaborations, there's a lot of found work that we aren't scheduling properly. Now it is scheduled properly because now we know we don't have time for it. So, so another consequence of
this next thing is insane, okay? What he's about to describe is ridiculous, okay? Buckle up.
was, as we move forward, was documentation became a way of life and became absolutely critical. We used to be able to just sit down someone new to the team with someone who had already been on the project, and they would just learn all of the things they needed to know, as kind of almost through osmosis. But now we had to rely on all of our documentation tools. So for example, we had a shared documentation tool with Confluence. We were also using Slack. We had to make sure and enforce putting communication in the major Slack groups, not only so that it could be asynchronous, but also so that everyone could see it, because we needed to make sure there were no like hallway conversations that was hiding work that was being requested. And finally, we had to do a lot more tutorials. So I was in OBS Studio a lot making video tutorials. So in Fallout 4, when I needed to teach someone the tool set, I would just sit down with them and answer their questions. But now we were working with people from around the nation, sometimes around the globe. I often didn't know when they would need me, and I often didn't know who might need me or what they would need to know. So it became absolutely critical to do a lot more tutorials and how-tos about every feature of the toolkit.
He was the senior, I believe his full title was Senior Quest Designer, okay? He was like the head guy. In all those Starfield like promotional videos and stuff, Will Shen was in those videos as like one of the core designers for Starfield. And he was spending his days making OBS tutorials on how to use the creation engine. Is that really the best use of his time? Like, what are we doing? And he's describing overall siloed effects, and he's describing how one team, like they didn't even want to discuss the game and stuff they were doing for work in the hallways, because then there might be a solution or something done in the hallway discussion that then isn't documented somewhere else. So then everything is just about filling out the Confluence, using Jira to, Jira to schedule tasks and get approvals from leadership. And it just really starts to sound like it's too many cooks in the kitchen. There's too much going on, and they're trying to juggle all of this stuff going on at the same time. But it just ends up slowing everything down into this bureaucratic mess. And it makes the company super inagile, which is what's pretty clearly present with like the Fallout 4 Next Gen update. When we talk about agility, you know, that's something like executives will say a lot. You might wonder what they mean by that, where it's like, we need to do these layoffs to remain agile. And you're like, what are you talking about? You're a company. What are you doing? What they mean is like, we need to be able to pivot quickly. If we launch an update for Fallout 4 and it breaks, we need to be able to quickly pivot, assign developers to fix it, and like give them time to figure out where the bugs are and deal with it. But because of how everything is set up within BGS right now, with everything being so crazy, scheduled out and planned, and everything is departmentalized and siloed, you end up with this weird isolation of all the teams, and then also a ton of sluggishness within the organization, because it's like, okay, we broke Fallout 4. That's a problem. We will fix it, but we have to finish everything else in the pipeline first. You know, it's like if you try to play one of those games, like I've been playing Civ 5 with my wife because we're nerds. And it's like if you were trying to queue up research tasks, like you can do in some of the later games, where you like queue up, I want to research this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And then it pumps through all of that. But like something comes up and maybe somebody declares war on you, and all of a sudden you need to research how to get cannons really quickly to be competitive. But you're already committed to all that other stuff. So you got to research cannons, but it's at the end of your 5 queue, and it takes 40 turns to eventually get the cannons researched, compared to a different civilization who maybe has something where they can like swap out what they're researching in real time to be able to quickly pivot when they need to. So stretch of an analogy, I grant you, but hopefully it gets the point across. I think with BGS, they are so inefficient, and then also they lack any and all agility because of that inefficiency and the multiple layers of management and oversight, that it just slows everything down to a crawl. And I think the evidence is in their output and the lack of quality, and then also the just sheer timelines that they're working with. With Fallout 4, literally in the time it took them to release Shattered Space, the first expansion for Starfield, it took them a year to put Shattered Space together. It released like close to the 1 year anniversary of the game. And in that year for Fallout 4, they had put out Far Harbor, Nuka World, all of those other like DLC for the automaton, whatever, for the what are the other ones? The other base building ones. You know, they had a bunch of them. And I just I think it was the automation one. Anyway, but the point is, they used to be very efficient. They could pump out a lot of content very, very quickly when they were close enough and small enough that they could just get up from their desk, go talk to Gerald in programming, go talk to Janice in the narrative team, and work on something and put it together. But now it's so sluggish and it's so over managed that I think it just has slowed everything to the point where it's incredibly inefficient and slow. And maybe that's the problem with BGS, is that it's not even like it's unmanaged, it's overmanaged. Like there's too many cooks in the kitchen, too much stuff is going on. And what's fascinating is that CDPR's response was actually kind of the opposite. They took the route of increasing responsibility from individual developers and making strike teams where they had like a programmer and an animator and a writer and these people in these strike teams, and they would do individual sequences or levels by themselves. So it was like mini dev teams working on chunks of the game, and that was their baby and they're responsible for it. And they don't have to go get clearance from 15 project heads while they're building it, but it's understood that that's your responsibility. If it sucks, it's going to be your fault, you know, but you don't need clearance from 35 different people. And that seems to have worked really, really well for them because they put out Phantom Liberty, and based on their earnings calls, it looks like they're going to be putting out probably 2 or 3 games by the time they get Elder Scrolls 6 out. At this rate. So I point to that as an example of why I am inclined to believe Phil Spencer's description of 5+ years away. He's saying in 2023 that Elder Scrolls 6 was 5+ years away, and they didn't even understand what the platforms would even be that this game was going to launch on, which to me pretty clearly suggests it's a next gen title. So I think that it's not coming out until 2028. I think it's a next gen game. Maybe they do a backwards compatibility thing and they get it working on Series X and PS5, maybe, but I'd find that surprising. I just don't see it happening. CEO of Microsoft overrides Phil, though. Is your suggestion that Satya Nadella would require BGS to release Elder Scrolls 6 a year early or 2 years early? Why would he do that? Like, why would he do that? Satya, yeah, I agree with Busta. I don't think Satya really cares about gaming. I think what Satya cares about is AI stuff right now. So I think Satya's big push is going to be to use AI tools in the entire pipeline and workflow. And his whole thing is going to be, oh, well, increase efficiency by using AI tools. And honestly, maybe for BGS, what they need are AI tools to sift through all of the bug complaints and all the crap that they have to deal with. If that's what they need to be efficient, then okay, I guess go for it. It can't get much worse, frankly. That's kind of where I'm at, where I'm like, you know what, at this point, I'm not sure it can, I don't think you could develop slower if you tried. Like, it's just ridiculous. But I think, you know, the people wishing for a 2026 release date, I get it. You're thinking, oh, well, it's been 3 years since Starfield and they're bigger than they ever have been. They're 3 times the size, so they should be able to develop 3 times as fast. It's just not how it works. I think that it's not coming until 2028 at the earliest, but time will tell. Time will tell. What is your final prediction? What's your final prediction? Maybe we do a straw poll. Should we do that real quick? Let me do a straw poll. I want to hear your predictions. Actually, I can just do this in chat. Put in chat 20, just do the year you think it's coming out. Do you think it's 2026, 27, 28, 2029? Let's see. 26, 28, 27, 28, 29, 28, 28, 27, 27, 27, 29. 28. We got some holdouts for 26. Some holdouts who still think. I appreciate the optimism. I appreciate Bethesda closes before. Dude, can you imagine? Oh, that would actually, it'd be sad. It'd be very sad, but that would be poetic, frankly. 2030? Oh, dude, if they take till 2030, that would be 7 years between main launches. And yeah, I mean, it was 5 from Fallout 76 to Starfield. We used to think that BGS Maryland was not really involved in Fallout 76. Now that it's popular, they're claiming that they were, and they say that they were much more involved, been much more clear about that. But yeah, that was still 5 years. So 5 years after Fallout 76 would put it at, or after Starfield would put it at 2028 at the earliest. You know, assuming no inefficiencies, no, like nothing else. Elder Scrolls 6 Shadow Drops Game Awards this December. That would be funny. You know what? They would get a lot of attention, frankly. Yeah, I've heard people say this where they're like, yeah, I think 2026. And I'm like, I don't know what you're looking at. Like, I just don't see what you're seeing that you think it's even close to that ballpark of 2026. Like, I just don't see it. Just don't see it. He took my thing. Red flag, red flag.